Okay, welcome everybody to DCB today. Thank you very much for coming. There aren't any planned fire alarms today, so if the fire alarm does sound, then it is a real one. So go back out through the main entrance and down the ramp to a safe distance away. How this will work is we'll go through the agenda, then we'll take public forum, and then we will consider the actual application itself. So, do we have any apologies, Jeremy?
Yes, apology from Councillor Fabian Breckles. Councillor Steve Pearce is substituting for him.
Great, thank you very much. And do we have any conflicts of interest for today's meeting? No. Nope, good. Okay. Yeah. Do we have any issues with the minutes from the last committee meeting on the 19th of July? Was everybody happy to sign those off? No, good, great. Okay, so next on to the action sheet. Do we have any actions? Don't think we do. No. Okay. Do we have any appeals that you can update us on?
There's one appeal we can update on. Sorry, I need to bring up the other screen. It's number 29 Hop House Close, which was an enforcement scheme that was then in abeyance until the application was decided. It was then an appeal against non-determination, and that non-determination appeal was decided by the inspector on the 11th of August, and they have refused the appeal. So that was in connection with the use of the building as a small HMO, and that the applicant hadn't been implementing in line with the consent that they had, and therefore it's now reverted to enforcement. And our enforcement team is actively liaising with the applicant to make sure that they do bring forward an application to make sure all is correct.
Okay, fantastic. That was, if I remember, it was a small HMO permission, but they were using it as a large HMO and an Airbnb, if I remember correctly.
That is all the information I have as well.
Okay, yeah, great. Well, thanks. That was that's a good outcome for us, I think, as well. For enforcement, do we have any updates or questions? No, I don't think anybody's got any questions about those. Good, okay. Then, where goes my agenda? My touchscreen's gone a bit all over the place today. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the public forum for the one item that we've got on the agenda today, which is South Bristol Crematorium. Now, what I'll do is I'll call forward the speakers and the question askers as I've got on my list. If you've asked a question, you've had an answer already, you get a supplementary question to that as well. Can I request that if there's any additional, we will be listening to the answers that you're given, and if there are any additional questions that you then pose or come up for that, we will pick those up in the member question segment of the meeting. So I know that quite a lot of people who are in attendance have come to these committees before, but just to remind you, the way in which this works is the public forum comes first. We've read all of the public forum statements, and we've read the questions and the answers. That is a part of the meeting which is for members of the public to engage in. When we then move to the officer presentation, that is for the committee and the officers only, when we will listen to the officer's presentation and we will ask questions to clarify, and then we will debate our thoughts and responses. When we move to the officer report stage of it, I have to ask members of the public not to engage with that bit and to sort of start taking issues or have any kind of commentary on the things that we're discussing. We need to kind of keep that within the committee at that point, and so would really respect it and sort of appreciate it if that was respected. So moving on to the questions. The first question we've got is from Mark Ashdown.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask a supplementary question, I'd like an answer to my question, please, because I haven't had an answer. If I can read it out to you. The proposed cemetery extension into areas 3 and 4, the proposed linking drainage associated with these proposals are within Colleges Brook site of nature conservation interest and so protected by the site allocations and development management policies DM19, which states, DM19, development which would have a harmful impact on the nature conservation value of a site of nature conservation interest will not be permitted. And my question is, why was that omitted? That passage omitted from the officer's report? The answer that's been given, I'm afraid, doesn't address that question. It answers something else.
So are you able to provide a more detailed answer?
I think in planning terms, it does come back, though, to actually having the evidence that there will be no harm, and therefore that is the answer. The answer is relevant in planning terms, therefore.
Well, I beg to differ, but if that's the answer I'm getting, I think that particular passage should have been quoted in the officer's report. Looking at the answer, which states any harm to the nature conservation value of the SNCI will be mitigated by a landscape and ecological management plan, a LEMP. That in itself admits that there is harm. And therefore, that passage of DM19, which I've just quoted to the committee, means that this development may not proceed. Can you address that, please?
The question that needs, in planning terms, needs to be answered is whether net harm remains once the mitigation is put in place. The mitigation that the management plan will deliver will mean that there will no net harm, and therefore it remains correct that there will be no harm. On the contrary, that there will be in net terms a small positive uplift.
We could debate this for quite some time, but I beg to differ that on plain interpretation of what is written in the policy adopted by this council, this application will cause harm and therefore it may not be permitted. There we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, question number 2 came from Danica Priest.
My first question was, in the planning statement, the council essentially admits it has only looked at potential expansion of existing crematorium burial sites. It hasn't looked at the sites for opening a new crematorium because of the cost and the time it will take. The need for additional burial sites has been known for some time, and they should have started identifying a site and earmarking years ago. Why hasn't the council explored all avenues available to provide both burial and protect nature, burial sites and protect nature?
Are you able to answer that?
The applicant has explored alternatives to the extent necessary, and therefore, again, in planning's terms, they have done what needs to be done.
Paragraph 8.45 of the planning statement makes it clear that council dismissed looking at any potential new sites on the basis of cost and time, like that's in the statement. This is in the planning portal, but it's not referenced in the officer's report or any of the papers going to the committee today. Why was this left out?
Sorry, could you ask again, sort of slower or...
Sure.
Yeah,
Sorry,
thank you.
my accent is hard to understand sometimes. Paragraph 8.45 of the planning statement makes it clear that the council dismissed looking at any potential new sites on the basis of cost and time. This is on the planning portal, but it is not referenced in the officer's report or any of the papers going out to the committee today. Why was this left out?
Well, the planning officer's report only needs to consider, and it doesn't need to address every single detail that's in the statement. It just needs to sufficiently consider everything that has been presented, and I think it does do that.
My next question was, Bristol Council passed a motion in September which promised to protect our SNCIs from development, including New Tree Farm specifically. Seen as this is a council-owned site and therefore completely in control of the council to develop, why has the council not prioritized nature and honored the will of the people who want to see this site protected? Why was the Green Spaces motion not being honored here?
What has been demonstrated through the application that they're not mutually exclusive, that actually nature can also be served, as well as the needs of the other needs of the city to provide sufficient burial space, so then the two are not mutually exclusive.
So that doesn't say SNCIs and important green spaces can be developed on if mitigation is done, so it doesn't answer my question. The exact wording of the motion, which was passed unanimously, is council calls for a halt to the proposed redevelopment or incursion of any remaining productive wildlife-rich agricultural land. And Yew Tree Farm is specifically mentioned by name in this motion. So why was that not mentioned in the report, and why is this motion being completely ignored by officers in the council?
Again, it is not possible to reference every single detail, and hence it's not referenced. But by us addressing it now, it doesn't make a material difference in planning terms, and hence it's not referenced.
Thank you. Okay, Amanda Barrett, you've got 2 questions.
Hi, this is the first time I've been here, so I have no copy of my questions. So I'm going to... Oh, thanks. Okay, just reading the answer. I'm just interested because this seems to have started in the 1960s, the idea of expanding the crematory. And I just wondered, are you now planning, bearing in mind you've only got 25 to 35 years, are you planning for the future? Have you got other sites in mind? Because time creeps up on us all.
I think that the short answer is it is on the council's agenda to plan for the future, but we are expecting a revision from the Law Society who are looking at the regulations, and that will allow us to change the approach, but it's not directly relevant to the planning application in front of us.
Question would be, so much is changing with burials right now. So the next 25 to 35 years might see a huge change, you know, with human composting, which sounds exciting to me. So are you factoring that in?
Well, yes, in that this application is looking forwards for 15 years, and therefore this does give us resilience and the space to plan for the longer term that you've referenced as well.
Crematorium seems to be full of plastic flowers and foil balloons and stuff like that. So will things change? Sorry, that's 3 questions.
I mean, I guess some of the questions are more a sort of strategic question that needs to go to the mayor rather than the planning authority, because they're sort of questions that the administration and the cabinet member with responsibility for this needs to answer. I would recommend that you ask at the next cabinet or at public forum for full council, which we have one next week. These would be good questions to the mayor, actually, because they're not ones that the planning authority can necessarily answer.
Okay. My final question, thanks for being patient, is bearing in mind things have changed so much in the last 20 years with climate change and biodiversity loss. I feel sweeping aside an SNCI to adhere to a plan that was dreamt up many years ago is not recognising the problems we all face, which are huge.
the reason why this application is being put forward is not to do with a plan from a long time ago. It's because the city is running out of space and needs to provide additional burial space for the next 15 years. There was a second part to your question.
It's just things are changing so fast in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss that surely they should take paramount importance in your minds.
Absolutely.
I feel these are just being swept under the carpet.
But it has been fully addressed in the application, which goes back to what my previous answer, in that their biodiversity has absolutely been addressed in this application, and that in net terms there will be an uplift in biodiversity gain.
All right, thanks.
Okay, Maddie Longhurst, you were next, I think.
Thanks. Am I supposed to read out my previous questions as well, or not?
No, you're not, but if you didn't feel like your question was properly answered, you can say so, but you have a supplementary question as well.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thanks very much. So it's difficult as a layperson to know, what is considered a planning issue, because obviously everything to do with land use is a planning issue, and but somehow the things that get through the door to be eligible for consideration is actually a very tiny number of things. So just hoping to sort of open these things out relates to what's been said already in terms of the limits to available space given by urban growth and existing boundaries. And just we are part of a combined authority, and part of being part of a combined authority is that you do things together. There is a duty to cooperate around things that are cross-boundary issues. The food system is one of those issues, and space for burials is another one of those issues. And my understanding is that it hasn't been considered as an issue yet within the mechanisms of the duty to cooperate. And I feel very strongly that it needs to be, as many of Bristol's land use issues need to be. So I'm interested in whether that's being considered in this proposal.
The duty to cooperate is particularly at the strategic level, and specifically in connection of the local plan. And we are absolutely working together with our neighbouring authorities on solving the key strategic problems. The burial space is very much an operational matter in the authority of each of the area. But also, if you think about it from a sustainability point of view, the closer you can provide it to where people want to visit their deceased, the better, because it's about shortening the journeys for visiting. So in that sense, it is not one that is appropriate to basically ask North Somerset or one of our other neighbouring authorities to provide burial space if there are solutions where we can provide them closer to home, basically.
Yes, and Bristol's fringes are in those other counties anyway. So those other counties are connected to Bristol intrinsically. And I would say it's not when it affects the integrity of the food system, it's not just an operational, very localised matter. It sets a dangerous sort of precedent about what's important. So I just wanted to ask another question. I work with cities across the UK and food partnerships in cities across the UK, and lots of people look to Bristol. Obviously, we're a gold award winning food city, and that's because of places like Yew Tree Farm that have regenerative grazing in a city, which is very something very much to be celebrated and that other cities look to. So I can see and have had discussions with other cities about the sort of impact of this decision on Bristol's reputation as a leading food city. And I know that's not directly a planning issue, but it is tangentially a very huge planning issue. So I wondered whether the reputational dimensions had been fully considered or accounted for, because many eyes are on this decision.
It has certainly been considered, and clearly it is also in the interest of the city and the local planning authority, and that's why, as part of the local plan, there is also supportive policies being brought forward through that. In terms of as part of the planning application, and in planning terms, the key things that need to be considered is the actual evidence. And the evidence was considered, and I think it is therefore, there are question marks whether the claimed impact is really going to materialise.
So that's something that you don't know. You don't know if that impact what the impact will be.
It is rather that it has not been demonstrated that so that it could be taken as a clear planning matter that you would then need to consider.
So that's outstanding information, important outstanding information that you don't yet have.
No, it's not important outstanding information. It has been demonstrated in the applicant's report that actually the amount of area affected is very small, and that also the land that was being grazed was not formally leased to Yew Tree Farm.
So you've had quite a lot of supplementary questions. I'll let you have one more.
Thank you. Yes, recognising that the incoming food policies in the local plan say to protect all existing food production in the city. The last thing, the food growing and allotment strategy and the crematorium burial strategies are being discussed at the committee scrutiny committee, the community scrutiny committee next week. So those discussions about the city strategies for food production and for crematoria has not yet been discussed as a council. So much work, many hours of work has gone into these strategies, but the discussion of them and the integration of them into decisions like this hasn't yet happened. So it seems to me that you need to have the discussions first, look at your strategies first, and then start to make these decisions. Does it seem like it would be beneficial to wait and look at those strategies and discuss them first?
In our complex world, there's constantly strategies evolving, and therefore in planning terms, that the concept of prematurity, which is basically what you're putting forward, is not something that can be recognised. You would never make a decision if you always had to wait for another strategy to still be completed first.
Maddie, okay, Maddie, I think you've had enough supplementaries. Thank you very much. Okay, so next we have Steph Wetherall, please. Do we have Steph? No, okay. Then Catherine Rivers, please.
Bring a copy of my questions, so I've got some rough idea. Because
do you need my notes again?
No, it's fine,
okay.
Thank you. So as you know, I was excluded from being a stakeholder. So those of you that have read your notes know that I haven't even been mentioned. I wasn't even in the neighbour consultation. And then I think on your first page where you've got the maps, doesn't even show site 3 that where all the burials are going to be taken unless you've had a supplementary sheet, because I think Mark Ashdown pointed that out, didn't you? And I'm not sure if you've had a supplementary sheet with the Site 3 burials on, which is the field closest to the crematorium. I did speak to my councillor the other day. Has that got all 3 sites on? So you only had a site with the attenuation pond, the drainage, from this is what we saw on the computer anyway. So just to make sure that you do have all of the land that's going to be taken. So obviously it's, you know, I've rented this. We paid our rent for 56 years. We may have sublet, yes. And I told Jonathan James that in 2021 when I met with him, and he said, well, it's our land. We've got permitted development on it. We're going to do what we like. So, of course, I was very doff my cap. Please let me have some land. Please let me have some land if it's going to be left after, because obviously I'm desperate. Then people more clever than me, Mark Ashdown's, pointed out that an SNCI is protected. Land is protected. It is like trying to knock down the cathedral. If you cause harm to it, you ain't going to do it. And it's simple as that. And then, you know, people, amazing people like Nick Gates, who produced the Wild Isles, he came down and he was literally skipping around our field saying, this ant hill is 150 years old, it could be 200 or 300 years old.
Catherine,
we've got such amazing species.
I'm really sorry, this is more like a statement at the moment.
I know,
you will get to do
sorry,
it.
But,
So
yeah.
do you have a
So
question?
I just want to make sure that you've got the accurate plans, so that's a yes, yeah, everyone's got accurate plans, and that we were admitted from actually being able to be consulted. So obviously I'm going to grab every second I can to speak to you guys, because I haven't had a voice. I've been trying to have my voice on social media, but if you can, you know, just bear in mind that an awful lot of disruption will happen. There's only one gateway, and I'll be excluded from the whole of the land. So, you know, I just, you know, why was I omitted from being a stakeholder?
Catherine, this is your opportunity to ask a question. Is there a question that you'd like to ask us? No, okay, all right.
Yeah,
so I guess a question would be, why weren't you included as a stakeholder? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and not really mentioned until the ecology report.
Okay.
Well, it was a public consultation, therefore you could have been a stakeholder, and I don't recognise the description, basically.
Well, from what we've read, it doesn't mention me as a stakeholder. It mentions Mark from Bristol Tree Forum, but not me as the person that's, you know, paid the rent on the land for the last 56 years. So, okay, fine. And as a neighbour consultation, I wasn't sent anything out, so just to let you know that. So,
Okay, Catherine.
It's a bit late.
Thank you. I will call you up to make a statement again in a short while. So can you use that bit for this bit? Thank you very much. Okay, so next we're going to move to the statements, for which we've got quite a lot on the papers and a few speakers. We did have some additional ones that were submitted for the original committee that this was scheduled for, but we haven't been able to bring them forward to this committee. But I just want the committee to be aware that there were additional statements also submitted that we're not able to see today, just as an administrative issue, essentially. So first up on the statement, I'll call you up. Same deal as usual. You've got a minute, but because we've moved down here now, my little box doesn't connect to my traffic lights anymore. So we're not doing the traffic light system. So what we'll do is I'll press the button here and it'll count down. When it gets to half time, I'll do that. And when it gets to full time, I'll do that. And then I'd like you to stop talking as rapidly as possible. When I do that, if you can start getting to your closing points, that would be great. So if you've got some closing killer lines that you'd like to deliver, when I do that, that's the time to start doing that, okay? So Mark Ashdown, I'm calling you first, please.
Thank you, Chair. You've obviously heard my representations about DM19, but I'd remind you that DM17 also applies because this is an urban landscape on a prominent green hillside, and DM17 says unequivocally, proposals which harm important such as green hillsides, promontories, ridges, valleys, gorges, areas of substantial tree cover and distinctive man-made landscapes will not be permitted. So I just ask you to bear that in mind in the course of your considerations, please. The other point I would make, certainly, you know, we've done a BNG calculation, and we show that the resulting plans will result in a net loss of 6.75 degrees. percent of area habitat units. Originally, the plans were to go off-site, and we pointed out that that may not be possible, but still, the loss of biodiversity is harm, and therefore DM19 raises its head yet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfectly on the minute. Well done, Mark. Okay, next we have Amanda Barrett again, please. Would you like to borrow my... Oh, do you have your statement? Okay, good.
Okay. So, I can see you face many of these meetings, and I'm going to try and cut to the chase. Decisions facing you today are complex, involving much bureaucracy, legislation, and politics. But the results, despite you thinking otherwise, will resonate far beyond this room. Yew Tree Farm is unique, whatever anyone else thinks. For literally miles around, it's the only one of its kind still surviving. Adverse impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss means hundreds of millions of people in the global south are now starving to death. Similar crises are unfolding in the north. You can't forget this. Can you truly put your hands on your heart and say the expansion of the cemetery, a short-term fix to a long-term problem, is more important than conserving a site like Yew Tree Farm? More than ever, we need decision makers that are truly visionary, and that means all of you. The natural world is our life support system. As we continue to destroy it bit by bit, the ripples created by each loss spread outwards and build.
Thank you very much. If you can close up.
Okay. We are creating a tsunami of unimaginable problems that we will not be able to fix, I promise.
Thank you very much. John Tarleton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, unfortunately, planning officers have underrepresented the strength of protection provided to sites of nature conservation under DM19, which is clear and unequivocal. Because of the importance of these sites, DM19 simply and unambiguously states that development which would have a harmful impact on the nature conservation value of an SNCI will not be permitted. There are no qualifications or conditions, no circumstances where this protection does not apply, and no suggestion this would be weighed against other issues. Officers admit that there would be harm to the nature conservation of this SNCI, citing the need for mitigation, which in itself is not actually allowed under DM19. The Nature Conservation Officer agrees, stating a harmful impact on the SNCI would occur which is not supportable by DM19. As such, according to planning policy, the committee has no choice other than to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Tony Cole, please.
Just move the mic up a bit. Can you hear me? Yep. The first point I want to make is about the failure to quantify the need. In the officer's report, it makes the point that South Bristol, Canford, Avonview and Greenbank cemeteries are not providing new graves, but capacity at Canford, Avonview and Greenbank is almost exhausted. They specifically do not state that capacity at South Bristol is almost exhausted. So I would like to put some flesh on that. Sorry, pardon the inappropriate metaphor if we're talking about burials. How many graves are there now in South Bristol Cemetery? How many are there now? How many could there be now? And how long will it take to reach that point? How long will it realistically take, and how long is it likely to be before that figure is reached? I noticed that you've drawn an incredibly crowded-looking schematic of the graves in the new bit of the cemetery. Could you not provide the similar figures for what's there now and how long it will last? And I'd like to reiterate what
what Catherine Withers says, because I think it is appalling not to consider her to be a stakeholder. Stakeholder is a very deliberately vague term. It doesn't mean legal.
Tony, can you wind up now, please?
Yeah. Yes. I looked at the list of neighbours who are invited to comment about this, and I am appalled to see Catherine Withers is not on them. There's a disputed bit, but there is a central area of the farm which belongs to Catherine Withers. And so to exclude her as a stakeholder is absolutely appalling, and it's against the rules of natural justice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Danica Priest, please. We can bring it down if you like.
Awesome. There we go. Thank you. I discovered this site during lockdown when I was living in a one-bed flat and had no access to nature other than public footpaths and parks. Running through the farm helped me deal with the immense grief I had from losing a friend to suicide. I don't think I would have survived that tragedy without the nature sites in South Bristol, which are being plucked off one by developers. I don't think officers and cabinet members realize exactly what they are taking away from the community forever when they recommend sites like this for development. They see numbers on a page, but they don't see the human impact that their actions have. They treat us campaigners like some situation that needs to be handled. This is a job to them, but to us, this is our livelihoods, our mental health, and our sanctuaries. We don't fight with them to be difficult, we fight because we have to. They don't realize the toll this takes on us. Approving this puts all SNCIs at risk. It sets a dangerous precedent. We should not be taking nature away from the living to appease the dead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Catherine Withers, please.
So as you know, my thoughts, this development will probably see the end of the farm. I took a good long walk around this morning, and looking at where you're having to access with heavy plant machinery, it's going to be about 4 acres that's going to be left for me to work with for any length of time. Obviously, with heavy plant machinery, excavations for drainage, we're talking subsoil on top, and it's unlikely to be done carefully. We know planning enforcement and how I've recently been let down by the planning department with the hedgerow is not good, and our enforcement record in Bristol is not great. So you can pretty much, if you are minded to pass this tonight, you can pretty much kiss goodbye to the SNCI status of the land. And it would actually break my heart to have to bring the animals back and to see things like the oak tree go, and I may not want to have the land. I'm a part of this, we're going to mitigate, so we're going to let you back on the land, and it has to be grazing, and that's fine. But, you know, it's going to be like being, I'm presented, at the moment, it's a beautifully made bed, the land, and you're going to give it back to me, soiled, dirty, with ripped sheets and a ripped mattress. And, you know, it's so hard. It's so hard to think that I'm going to have to repair that, you know, delicately, you know, get the SNCI status back again. And, you know, I'm 53 now. I love doing what I do. Being a farmer means everything to me. Producing food that's, I know, is the best quality food I can, and looking after nature and having the very last bullfinches that are in the city mean the world. And, you know, if you just do this without a second thought, I'm just done. I can't carry on, because I've already been evicted from 15 acres for trying to fight a fair fight with housing development. I mean, God, what are you doing? This is one farm left, 28 down to 1, and you're trying to get rid of us. So this decision's yours, and I just hope to God you'd make the right one. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Christine Townsend, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to reiterate about the planning statement that wasn't in your pack, and I'm going to quote it to you. So it actually says 8.45, if expansion is not possible, the only alternative to the council would be to find a new cemetery site. It's quite clear, looking at that planning statement and also looking at the cabinet papers that back from 2020, that nobody has looked anywhere else, and that's really problematic, because This SNCI, as you've just heard, is going to be impacted to a huge extent. You have also heard from your own policies those areas that you can use in order to refuse this. If you were in a situation where the whole city had been looked at and this was the only option, that would be very different. That is not the position that you are currently in. It is a choice not to look elsewhere. And we need to be looking elsewhere before we go into what is one of the most ecologically and biodiverse areas of our city, and that's why it's got protected status. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody who's come and spoken today. We're now going to move on to the officer report, and hopefully we've had them emailed. Have you been able to email us the officer reports, the statement, the slides? It's been a very long, hot day, the officer slides.
Who shall I email?
Can you email them to the entire committee? But basically we can't see what's up on that screen very well, and my old eyes cannot see that at all. So.
Sorry, Jeremy, I've sent it to you. Are you able? Because I haven't got a list of
Yep,
members.
I can do that. Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. So just pause for a moment whilst we... Great. Forgot to double check when we got back from the site visit. Yeah. So the other thing to say as well, we had a site visit this afternoon which was attended by about just over half of the committee. A couple of people couldn't make it, but it was a very informative site visit as well. So just to best your minds that we have seen the site as well. And Steve Pearce as well.
Yeah.
We will banish you to the corner of the room if you sniff at people. Anyway, everybody should have received the slides now into their inboxes. And if Councillor Pulteney sniffles again, he's being banished to the back row.
Thank you, Chair. Are you happy for me to start? Have you got everything? Excellent. Just before I start, I will just mention that we have got the ecologist and the highway officer sat in the stalls who hopefully can answer any questions you have over the ecology and highway issues. So the application in front of us is for the expansion of the cemetery, which involves essentially new infrastructure to allow additional burial space within the area of City Council ownership at South Bristol Cemetery. Screens at the other end have gone off, but sorry. This slide shows the new plots. Essentially, the application is divided into 3 plots. There's a plot, the triangular piece of land, which is close to the access to the cemetery. The northern burial plot, which is obviously towards the north and by the railway. And there's also a plot of land which has been allocated for a new drainage pond to be installed. As well as that, there's various drainage runs across the site, one particular drainage run across the site which joins the elements together. In terms of allocations, you've heard already about the issues with site allocations. So that's the local plan allocations on the screen. Essentially, all of the green area is greenbelt, covered by greenbelt policies. The area in striped is the SNCI. So what that means is the southern plot is outside the SNCI, but the northern plot and the drainage pond plot are within the SNCI. Just got a few slides which indicate what the layout will be like. Obviously, this will be delivered in phases as and when the plots become necessary. But yeah, this is a southern plot with a new access and road and a few parking spaces and an area left over for grassland within the southern plot. The northern plot, unfortunately, the plan is not the sort of the normal orientation, but so north is to the left-hand side of the plan. So again, new access from an existing roundabout, parking spaces, and it's proposed to deliver this plot on a phased basis. So phase 1 would be the southern element, and then phase 2 to the north. And then finally, that's the plan of the pond that will be put into area 4, I think. There are questions on site visits about the impact on listed buildings, so I've just added a couple of extra slides which show the listed buildings. The sort of 90 low-level office block, which is to the west of the triangular piece of land. You can just see the triangular piece of land, the southern plot. Slide. Side of that. There's a fairly substantial hedge between the sites and essentially no visible link between the two. So the officer view is that the development doesn't impact on the setting of that building. And the other listed building, again, the main part of that slide is the triangular piece of land on the sun plot. The other listed building is the one that's labelled with a point saying Honeyfield Personal Training. And again, there's a lot of there's other buildings around it that's divide it from the plot. And very little visual interaction between the two. So again, officer's view is that it doesn't impact on the setting of that listed building. So in terms of consideration in the application, our starting point is section 38(6) of the Planning Acts, which basically say that we have to determine the planning application in having regard to the development plan. And should be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So, yes, under normal circumstances, our starting point is what the development plan requires, and then we have to take into consideration whether there are any other material considerations which would outweigh that development plan requirement. So I've just made a quick list of the key things that I wanted members to have in their mind. There's an identified need for burial capacity for the city. The city, well, it says here the city has 3 years more capacity. I think we heard today that it's more like 2 years now at the current burial rates. There's no opportunity to expand other cemeteries within the city. It is, in terms of Greenbelt policy, it's considered an acceptable development in the MPPF within the Greenbelt, and officers are of the view that the impact on the SNCI can be managed and mitigated through appropriate management of the site. Just before I finish, draw members' attention to the update sheet, which has some further comments on it and an updated list of conditions. I'm afraid there is additions to that as well. So since the update sheet, we've had 3 further objections, including one from the Avon Wildlife Trust, all around impact on the SNCI and Yew Tree Farm. Also had comments from the Contaminated Land Officer who has recommended some additional conditions, essentially to secure a further assessment of the site and appropriate mitigation. So our recommendation is to approve the application. It is, in our view, in accordance with the development plan, but we would ask members for delegated authority to finalise the wording of the conditions, particularly the additional contaminated land conditions. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Before we get on to questions, the updated sheet, where can we find that? It's not attached to the officer report.
It's at the end of the public statements, so it was circulated with the public statements.
Okay, thank you very much for highlighting that. Okay, so questions. Guy first.
Thanks, Chair. I may have some more questions later, but I wanted to start with 10.28, the biodiversity net gain, which the development's required to deliver, refers to an update on the extent of that improvement to be provided at the committee meeting, and that's then repeated under 10.30. An update on the biodiversity net gain will be provided at the meeting. I feel like I might have missed something, or is that to be sort of inferred by the other things we've heard, or yeah, what's the biodiversity net gain?
It is in the amendment sheet. I haven't actually got the figure in front of me. I know there is a net gain, a positive. I don't know if Fern remembers the actual figure.
Hi, yeah, I can provide the actual figure now. We did go through several versions of the BNG metric, several revisions because my assessment deemed that the calculation wasn't correct several times. I now deem that it is, and the final calculation has come out as positive 2.93% gain in area habitats, 107% gain in hedgerow units, and 0.19% gain in river units.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions ready, or shall I start going down my list? Katya?
I've just lost my notebook. I think one of the biggest concerns to me is the difference between what Yew Tree Farm is saying is going to mitigate their farm, and it seems like it's going to have a dramatic effect to their farming to the point of where it's not viable anymore. And what we learned today when we were talking to the officers was that it didn't sound like it was going to be such a huge mitigation, that there were plans to help the farm continue, and that it was an important, and as it should be, an important addition to our city. However, it is confusing to me that Catherine says that she never got consulted, or that she wasn't part of the stakeholders of working this out. I would have thought that didn't sound like that this afternoon, but obviously she's told us this evening. I have no reason not to believe her, by the way. So I'd like to know more about what the kind of mitigation and what kinds of things are we going to do to stop you to keep Yew Tree Farm carrying on the good work that it does.
I guess the sort of the starting point is Yew Tree Farm, I think, is around about 48 acres, or they graze around 48 acres of land. Of that, 20 acres, sorry, it should be in hectares, but I couldn't find the hectares figure, so apologise for being imperial. It's not my usual preference, but only 20 acres of that is BCC land, and with the mitigation. So there's the intention is that there will be some improvements to other land to make it more useful for grazing. So with the mitigation in phase 1, it's been calculated that there will be a 4% loss of the BCC land, and in phase 2 a 14% loss of the BCC land that's available to Yew Tree Farm. Beyond that, obviously, we are the planning authority, and we are not involved in those negotiations directly. And the Yew Tree Farm doesn't currently have hasn't got a formal agreement in place, as I understand it, to graze the land. So there will be discussions that will have to happen in order for Yew Tree Farm to continue to use that BCC land. But I think the takeaway is that this is, whilst we understand the concerns, this is a relatively small area of the overall grazing land.
Do we have any other burning questions immediately? Steve?
Yeah, it kind of follows on from part of your question. And it's about consultation with the adjacent land user and current tenant of some of this land. And it's around what appears to be a lack of consultation. And members of the public have asked the question why, and haven't received, to my feeling, haven't received an answer. So I'll try as an elected member. Why haven't they been consulted?
So I think there's a couple of sort of things here.
Well, I'm sorry, but actually there's one thing here. Either they've been consulted or they haven't been consulted. And by the way, if a planning issue ever comes up that involves me, you better consult me.
Okay. If I can sort of answer then by making 2 points. One is that I haven't got the list of people who were consulted in front of me, but there were three things that happened in terms of consultation. There were writing to neighbours, there were erection of site notices, and notices in the local paper. We're required essentially to do 2 of those by law, and we've met those requirements and gone beyond those requirements. The affected parties have commented on the application, and we have given weight to those comments. So I can't say whether or not they received a letter as part of our original sort of post out, but they will have been kept informed of the progress and obviously invited to this meeting. The other thing I was just going to add is there's reference by a number of parties to whether or not they were included in as a stakeholder. I think that's reference to the statement of community involvement, which was submitted with the application. I understand they were consulted as part of that statement of community involvement, but they weren't, for reasons of drafting, I think more than anything else, they weren't included as a list of stakeholders. That doesn't mean that their comments have any less weight in the either statement of community involvement or in the decision on the planning application.
I've got to say that I have to be very careful what I say. But there appears to have been a degree of fumbling of the ball here. Not as a councillor, as a citizen, it appears to me that there's been something of a lack of good manners here. I'm going to have a lot more to say when we actually get round to debating the application. but it would seem to me to be politic with a small p, just to talk to the neighbour and to be very clear about talking to the neighbour. I'm thinking about putting a larger window in my house. The first person I spoke to with a cup of tea was my next door neighbour before I get anywhere near a planning application. So this appears to me to have been butterfingered and ham-fisted in the way that this has been done. And I'll have a bit more to say presently.
And just to say, Ollie, I can see your hand, but it's a no. Thank you. Simone, did you want to respond?
I was just, if I may add, my understanding is, from the information received, that there have been extensive conversations. Whether everything has been reflected in the report, or more could have been possibly reflected of that in the report, I can't. Ideally, I would like to look into the system now as well to actually prove to you, but we are where we are, so we have to take things on face value. But
into the mic.
I'm sorry.
All I was going to say, my understanding is that from what we have been told by the applicant, there have been extensive conversations.
Well, perhaps you can have a word with the applicant. I'll have a word with the applicant because the applicant is a cabinet member. And perhaps you can take it from me that at least one member of the committee viewed this through narrowed eyes. You know, didn't really like this as a method of consultation. I think this leaves a lot to be desired.
Thanks, Steve. I think probably quite a lot of the committee are sharing your questions, and I think that's one of the things that we can get to when we get to the debate section of it. We're hearing that the applicant believes that they have consulted. We're hearing from the nearby stakeholder that they have not, and it's for us to take a view on our opinion on that. Yes, exactly. So I asked Simone if you could have DM19 to hand. If you could read us through that and explain what DM19 is and then how we think this application does satisfy that would be great.
Yes, unfortunately, I haven't managed to bring it up quickly enough.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about answers. But the key point that it goes back to is there harm or not? And actually, we have heard the professional view of the ecologist that with the mitigation in place, there is a positive uplift. And hence the officer recommendation, it is policy compliant. I will try for a bit longer to find the policy.
We'll come back to that then. Okay, in which case, I've got a question probably more for Lewis. Can you point out on the map exactly where the SCNI, get that in the right order, are on this site, so that we can kind of visualise it in relation to the application?
For members who were on the site visit, it's probably quite easy to picture, but there are essentially three areas covered by the application. The southern plot is entirely outside the SNCI. Outside, yes. The triangle, yeah, exactly. The triangle is outside the SNCI. The two northern plots are within the SNCI. In essence, the boundary of the SNCI is drawn around the existing cemetery. I don't know how well members can see. They might be able to see better on their own computers, but if you compare slides 2 and 3, you'll see that both the new drainage infrastructure and the new northern sector are within the SNCI. Does that answer your question?
I think
So does it make it clear to everybody where they are? Okay, great. And, oh, you got it. Okay, you go for it.
How much do we... shall I just read the policy rather than the explanatory text, because it's quite long? So, development which would be likely to have any impact upon habitat, species or features which contribute to nature conservation in Bristol will be expected to, first, be informed by any appropriate survey and assessment of impacts, and second, be designed and sited insofar as practically and viably possible to avoid any harm to identified habitats, species and features of importance, and three, take opportunities to connect any identified on-site habitats, species or features to nearby corridors in the wildlife network. Where loss of nature conservation value would arise, development will be expected to provide mitigation on-site, and where this is not possible, provide mitigation off-site. Development on or adjacent to sites of nature conservation value will be expected to enhance the site's nature conservation value through the design and placement of any green infrastructure provided. I think that's largely it. There's still some further text, but...
Okay.
Do you want me to carry on? Okay. Sites of nature...
Oh, no, we're carrying on. That's... Thank you.
Actually, it is probably right to keep reading on. Sites of nature conservation interest, development which would have a harmful impact on the nature conservation value of a site of nature conservation interest will not be permitted. Wildlife corridors. But this is still... I need to bring it back to... There will be a positive uplift.
Okay, thank you. And it talks about mitigation. Will any of the mitigation of this be off-site, or will it all be on-site?
It's all on-site.
Okay, thank you. Do we have more questions from anybody else? That's not me. Steve.
Two. The southern site is outside of the... Just to reiterate, the southern site is outside of the SNCI. Are the two northern sites wholly or partially within the SNCI?
They're both wholly within the SNCI.
Wholly within the SNCI, thank you. I did have another question, and I'm sure it will come to me, because it was really important.
So I have many questions, but everybody else, stick your hand up as soon as, okay, Guy, I'm going to be sharing.
Thanks, Chair. No, it was more to do with DM17 and the potential harm to a valuable urban landscape, and it provides a second test, or a different test, I should say, one that has to weigh the value of the use as a cemetery against the value of the use of the loss of the landscape. And that seems to be where the issues around the cemetery become material planning considerations. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, I think the need for burial spaces is a material consideration that you should have in your mind when testing against any policy, because, as I say, the test is it in accordance with the development plan, or are there material considerations that outweigh that? But it is specifically in DM17 there is that specific balance point that speaks to that particular issue.
May I? And apologies, because I don't want to open up a can of worms around this, but the statement that we should follow the plan, the NPPF, unless there's a material planning consideration to the contrary, I appreciate that completely. But the NPPF, or the plan, isn't one thing. It's hundreds of different points, thousands of different points, all weighing against each other. Material considerations are thousands of different things. So the committee has to find a test or several tests to balance one thing against the other. Now, I appreciate the applicant is asserting that those tests are met repeatedly and that the balance comes down in favour of the development. I suppose what I'm asking is, when we're applying our mind to those tests, it doesn't strike me that there is very much wiggle room for bringing in the shortage of cemetery space in very many different places. That's the only place I can find where there's a mitigation argument. It may well be an objective of the council, but as a material consideration in planning terms, is there somewhere else that the need for more cemetery space comes in other than through DM17?
So a number of things to say. So your officers have considered that, and it's their professional opinion that on balance this is clearly in line with policy, because particularly because on DM19 there is no harm, there's a positive balance. Also on DM17 we see it as in line with the policy. To come back to how does the cemetery consideration also come in, it's also through legislation, in that as a public authority we are under the public sector equality duty. If we would allow to run out of burial space, that would disproportionate, or would have an impact on equalities, because it would impact on protected character. So different faiths group would be disproportionately impacted. So that is another reason why it's actually really quite important to bring in and attach substantial weight to the consideration of running out of burial space.
Last question, I promise. Does that mean that an equalities impact assessment that identifies a disproportionate impact in terms of the protected characteristics can turn something that would not otherwise be a material planning consideration into a material planning consideration?
An equality impact is a planning consideration, and it needs to be considered in all planning applications.
Okay, thanks. Okay, pop that mic on though. We'd like to be able to hear it.
Okay, that was a very good question. That was an excellent answer. And those are exactly the kind of details that we need to be aware of. And a similar one that I'm trying to tease out now. Around harm and mitigation, because there's an awful lot centering on this. And I want an answer not only for myself and for colleagues, but for the public and members of the press as well. In this policy, is the harm considered net of mitigations or gross before mitigations? Because it appears to me that there will be harm before mitigations, but the mitigations get the applicant out of jail, to paraphrase, colloquialize, assault the language grievously.
So it's considered net.
It's considered
net with the mitigation in place, right. And because there is the uplift, there is the policy compliance.
Right. I think that is the single most important factor here, that harm is considered net rather than gross. Thank you.
Thanks. I've got a question. There was something that sort of jumped out on the report, which is about the relevant planning history. So just like some clarification about that. It was item 4, so 4.1 and 4.2. Could you just sort of explain a little bit about the previous planning and how, what's the word? Whether or not it is implemented within the timescale of its planning permission originally as a cemetery. And a little bit more about what that wording and element of the report means.
I suppose in simple terms, the answer to your question is we're not entirely sure whether it is implemented in the terms of the original planning permission. So the position is that this land was granted planning permission to be used as a cemetery in 1963, I think. And in 1969, a further application was made which related to specific elements of the work. The applicant came to us in 2022 with a certificate application, which was an application essentially to say that they could carry on with the planning permission that they had in 1963 and build out the rest of the cemetery. At the time that application was made, because there's this issue of two separate applications which were made under two slightly different sort of planning regimes, the law changed between them, it was not entirely clear whether or not that planning permission still was extant, or we didn't have enough evidence at the time that application was made in order to grant that certificate and allow them to carry on. Hence, they were advised to withdraw that application and put in a new application which would allow members and the public to review the latest legislation and ensure that the application was in accordance with that. The one thing I would add to that is whether or not that previous planning permission is extant is not material to your decision in any way. So if it's extant, you can still refuse the application, and vice versa. If it's not extant, you can still approve the application. This application doesn't rely on that; it's a separate thing.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so if I understand it right, it's clear that the building, the crematorium building itself, was built within the time limit from the planning permission, but it's not clear whether additional usage of the land then has been in that time, because obviously the cemetery itself has sort of grown over the years.
Yeah, that's correct. Essentially, the 1969 application related specifically to the area, the building, and the area around the building, which we are happy that was implemented, but it relates to the rest of the site. That's correct.
Great, thank you. And then, did I understand it correctly when we were told on the site visit that the land itself, the crematorium, was originally farmland? It was compulsory purchased.
That's what we were told on the site visit. I haven't been able to verify that, so it's not in the papers. But yeah, we were told that.
I was told that. Okay, great, thank you. Do you have any more burning questions? Because I have some more to keep going, but no. Okay. So one of the things that Guy raised as a question at the site visit was about heritage assets, and one of the things I did notice actually when doing the officer presentation was on slide 8. So we able to get into the triangular field plot 1, area 1, but oh no, completely the wrong application. There we go. So on slide 8, we're told that the heritage assets weren't compromised because the hedge was in the way, which it is a big one around the pavilions. But on slide 8, with the Elm Farmhouse, I can't see a hedge between Elm Farmhouse and that triangular plot 1. You see what I mean just here? I mean, we couldn't get into that field to view it for ourselves, but we were told that there's no heritage asset impact because of the hedges, but I can't see any hedges between area 1 and that farmhouse.
Yeah, I think there is a hedge, but from the looks of things, it's probably not as robust as the hedges which are around the rest of the boundaries of the site. I think the thing to be aware of in that case is that actually the bit of the development which is closest, the bit of the site that's closest to that farmhouse will essentially be left as grassland. No idea what that means. It's not going to be used for graves. And the bit that is, if you like, where the graves will be going, there's another building, a much more modern building, in between the listed building and the area that will be used for burials. So I think even if the hedge is not particularly robust, as it looks like on the slide, I think the actual the ability to view one thing from the other, to view the listed building from the where the graves are, and to view the graves from where the listed building are, would be negligible at best, and I'm confident that there's no harm there to the setting.
Okay, thank you. And then I've got a question about the pond, because it's the pond, it feels like, that has a lot of the negative impact there to this area of land. So we did see the sort of drainage of Network Rail is quite close by. I did ask on the site visit what had been explored in terms of putting the drainage from that pond directly into the Network Rail drainage. Could you sort of explain why that hasn't been a route that's been taken forwards?
I don't know the details of the conversations that have gone on with Network Rail particularly, but I would say that Network Rail have very specific requirements about their infrastructure, and in general won't allow other parties to use that infrastructure for anything other than things that service Network Rail. I mean, it's part of their it's part of their remit as the operators of the railway to protect those. As I say, my understanding is that Network Rail would not welcome that infrastructure being used for that purpose.
Okay. And then in terms of the,
may I just add, and as covered in the report, the drainage officer are happy and have confirmed that it's satisfactory what is being proposed, and actually that's all the applicant must do. They needn't explore lots of other options. As long as the drainage officer has green lighted what they're proposing, then that is fine.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the construction management and the build time of that pond, how long is it expected to take, and through which route into the site will the machinery being used for it take, and where will it be stored, and what sort of damage will be caused by that machinery during the construction period?
In very simple terms, I don't know the answer to that. If it's something that members consider to be of particular concern, then we could add an additional condition requiring a construction management plan to ensure that that damage was limited.
Thank you. And a final question on the pond. Burial does involve some pollutants in terms of like embalming fluids and those sorts of things. What sort of mitigations and preventative measures are being taken for that, to stop that from getting into the brook or into the land generally?
Again, I haven't got the details of the specific mitigations involved in front of me, but I can confirm the Environment Agency, who are the party who are responsible for the water quality in the brook, have confirmed that they're satisfied that that there will be no impact.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? Or ready to move on? Okay, all right. So if we move on to the debate part of this, I think before we start, I think we need to sort of be aware that obviously planning is a sort of careful balancing of needs, and there are some very important conflicting needs here, and our officers have sort of carefully considered their recommendation. But it's also our job as a committee to take a view on whether or not we agree, and we are free to concur or to not with this. And I think we all agree that there is an urgent need for burial spaces. It's just what we have to look at in our considerations whether or not this site is the right site and whether or not the potentially irreversible damage that it could cause is worth the gain that we'll get from it. So if anybody would like to, Katja, was that a finger from you?
I think thinking about this one is a very sensitive issue. I think that cemeteries are not just places for the dead, they're actually more places for people to visit. And when I was talking to the site manager, he was talked a lot about the visitors more than anything else. He talks about the sensitivity of the visitors and what they need and how they should remember their families. And I think we do need to remember that. It's also an equalities issue. Again, not everybody buries people the way I would like everybody to be buried. I would definitely prefer to do something that's more environmentally friendly, and there's various different methods. However, it'll be a long change before we get old people to do that. And in a lot of this, different cultures have different methods of burying, and it's really, it's one of our most biggest life's transitions, isn't it? Birth, marriage, death, and it's all parts of that. So that's something that I'm not all that concerned about the environmental impact of it. I think the site manager, the way he was talking about how they now dig out a grave where they don't just chuck it on the ground, they actually dig each level, and he's going on about it and how high the grass has to be and all this on the level 1 site. It shows that they are putting a lot of mitigations and a lot of thought process into what the site looks like and how strong the biodiversity should be kept for that. And so I'm quite pleased with that. The part that concerns me the most is Yew Tree Farm. It still feels like there was a lack of consultation or a lack of discussion with the owner of the farm or the runner of the farm. I'm still confused about the figures of this percentage grazing and that percentage not grazing, and losing half the cattle or only losing 1.1 cattle. I'm not quite sure. That's the part that gets me. Is I would like to see further discussion, because it's really important to keep Yew Tree Farm as it is, or at least going, so we have some sort of compromise between the two. I mean, it would be the worst thing in the world to tell you while you're grieving, to tell you, I'm sorry, you can't bury them there. You have to go off to the other end of Somerset or something, or North Somerset, which they'll probably fight as well. So.
Anyone else?
I did trail that I might have something to say. So in the absence of other people flinging themselves across the parapet, I shall begin. This, as Katja says, this is a sensitive, controversial application, and it's one of the most controversial that I've sat on, and it's the most controversial I've sat on for some years. I have a great deal of sympathy with Yew Tree Farm. Personally, ideologically, politically, they do great work, they have done for a long time, and they wish to going forward. My sympathy isn't necessarily a planning consideration. We need more burial space. There are very vocal supporters of Yew Tree Farm. I don't doubt if we were to, if the council, not we are the local planning authority here, if the council were to propose stockpiling bodies in coffins in warehouses because of a lack of burial space, I'm sure there'd be an equal or greater public outcry. There are a number of local authority, the council has a number of policies that it has adopted, resolutions that it has made in council that support tacitly, explicitly, less explicitly, the continued use and activity at Yew Tree Farm. The council, I must stop saying we. Hit me if I say we.
Don't tempt me.
If the council talks a lot about gold standard food, we talk a lot about our environment. The council, we again, the council talks a lot about its environmental credentials. Politicians in this chamber talk a lot about their credentials. This application from the council that has such marvellous policies in place and has passed such glorious resolutions should be embarrassed that it's in the headlights of this public. I'm going to get into a lot of trouble over this. I might be demob happy. The council might be very embarrassed at what it's doing to Yew Tree Farm, or what it appears to be doing to Yew Tree Farm, what it might be perceived to be doing to Yew Tree Farm. The administrative convenience of the council in owning a particular plot of land and being able to extend its burial space into it, that administrative convenience and a planning consideration, I don't think. The applicant's convenience isn't necessarily something I'm going to place at the top of my agenda. That said, and I think I've made it very clear that this application incurs my immense displeasure. The way it's handled hasn't been great. I think I've made that clear as well. The council could have come up with alternative options for burial space. It has chosen not to. That's fine. That's for the council to determine. We have to determine the application that is in front of us. The application that is in front of us shows that there is a net habitat gain, and I think that is the killer app. The killer app. Now, it might be that it would be convenient to the members of the committee to force the applicant to throw themselves on the mercy of the Secretary of State to determine this application, but I will be voting in favour of it. Although, as I say, I do so through narrowed eyes. I trust I make myself completely obscure.
It was a wonderful ride. Okay, Chris, are you indicating that you wanted to talk?
Thank you, Chair. I find myself in a very difficult position. I have to make a decision on this, but it doesn't look as though it's going to be the decision that I feel I should make. And the reason for that is I don't think, number one, I've been given sufficient information to be able to make the right decision. And secondly, like my colleague, Steve Pearce there, I don't feel that it's been handled properly. And it should be handled properly. We're in a position where we have to protect various people, various sections of society, if you like. We have to protect things that we've already got that are good. And unfortunately, the way I feel, if I go along with the officer's decision today, I won't be doing that. I won't be carrying out my responsibilities. And I don't say that as a newcomer to planning. I've been in planning in Bristol for 15 years. And prior to that, I was in planning. In fact, I chair planning in Somerset, North Somerset. So I've had some experience, and that experience tells me that to vote in favour of the officer's recommendation would be in error. So I'm sorry, I can't support it.
Thank you. Guy, then Leslie.
Guy, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It reminds me a little bit of the blue finger from all those years ago. Those of you who weren't around in 2014, back when we were asked to sacrifice another piece of phenomenally valuable agricultural land to the infrastructure needs of the city. That time it was for transport, and we were told that this little sacrifice would mean that all of our transport woes would be solved forever. And it didn't turn out quite like that, but the land's still gone. There's an awful lot of criticism of this, and members of this committee may say it's been handled badly. Whatever we might say, that cannot be held to be the fault of council officers. There are council officers from the capital projects team that are pursuing what they've been told to pursue. There are planning officers who've been told to make a weighted balance between policies, and that's their job to do. And if there's a flaw in this being brought forward against the wishes of full council, and it was brought against the wishes of full council, that's a problem of political leadership, and that's for the voters to make their judgment on in the fullness of time. I do sometimes find it troubling when there does seem to be a blurring of the line between what the council's objectives are as a developer and the council's objectives as a planning authority. This is one of the few cases where I don't feel that line has been blurred. It's one of the first applications I feel I can genuinely say that. But in this case, as we look at the case in front of us, as others have said, we have to make this judgment on material considerations within our planning system. So I throw this out there for your consideration. That while the SNCI, am I going to get that acronym wrong, allows for a net determination once mitigation has been made, the rules around heritage do not. The rules around heritage consider history irreplaceable. And there are 3 listed buildings in that site. Now, one of them is a 1970s office block, and I give it very little credence, but that farmhouse there overlooks what is currently a field. And it sits in a context of some very old trees. And while those trees can be mitigated to the satisfaction of our tree policy, that is the context in which this valuable piece of history sits. And that may well give us a material consideration that overrides the need to provide the cemetery spaces that are there. I think there are other bases on which you could turn this down, but currently that feels to me like quite a strong one, which isn't to say that I don't disagree with a policy that says that you can chop down a tree and replace it with some new ones and that's a net gain, but that is what our policy says. But this might give us the out that we need, and it has the added benefit of being true. Thanks, Chair.
We like true very much. Leslie, into the mic, or can you just swing it around?
I will be supporting the application or the officer's decision because we do need the burial space. I agree with both Steve and Katja on this one. They don't like it either. They think that Yew Tree Farm has been treated appallingly. But again, I don't know who that is. I don't think it's the planning department, but the decision has been made, presumably by cabinet. So I suppose they're the ones that we should blame. But we do have to have some burial space, and we have to have it quickly. Katja said that there are some people, some religions that need to bury their people quickly. We can't have them in a shed somewhere piling up, and we can't for anybody. It is not dignified. So I will support it, but again, I'm not too happy about it.
Thank you. Unless anybody else, Sarah?
Yeah, I'll try and keep this brief. Obviously, we've spent, the time reading the papers, the site visit, and this meeting as well, weighing up pros and cons, because it's a very, very difficult application. But I suppose that's why we need a planning committee. In a perfect world, we could sort out the issue of the burial spaces without affecting anyone else, and it would be a very simple process. But sadly, it's really not, and we have to balance so many different priorities for this application. And I think, again, I agree with the councillors who have said that Yew Tree Farm has been treated appallingly, by whoever that is, and not being consulted. And I fully support us having, the farm and their continuation. But as has been said, we desperately need burial plots. We desperately need to increase the land that's dedicated to that. And so, again, heavy heart, through squinted eyes, through narrowed eyes, I will be supporting the application.
I've got Steve and then Guy.
Yeah, thank you for humouring me, Chair. Conservative colleagues are going to be cheered that I'm going to speak up for landowners' rights. The landowner has a right to do what he wishes with her land, I guess.
No.
Given what I've said earlier about the acute embarrassment that I'm sure councillors feel around the policies and resolutions that they've adopted, and the impact that this is having on Yew Tree Farm, I'm sure that the applicant will want to do, along with rights come responsibilities, and I'm sure that the applicant will want to do everything that it can to accommodate the continued operation of Yew Tree Farm going forward.
Guy and then Lorraine.
That's not really anything for planning officers to do. That's a pearl of wisdom in the ear of.
Thanks. So Guy, then Lorraine, and then Katja.
Thanks, Chair. I've never done this before, I don't think. I'm genuinely throwing out there an attempt to persuade colleagues, if there is any persuasion left to be had. If there is a member on this committee that sees the dichotomy involved here as being a choice between protecting Yew Tree Farm and the dead piling up in the city, that is not a basis for making this decision. We are running out of burial space, this is true, and we may well run out of burial space in a couple of years. This is the first proposal I've ever seen for meeting that need. This is one site that has been chosen, as far as I can tell, as someone put it quite elegantly earlier, for administrative convenience. Now, it may well be a very good site, but that is not the alternative that's being put before us. It does the need to do that on this site outweigh the loss that's required by the development. If you think there are no other sites, if you think there's no way of doing this in a more sympathetic way, if you think that there's no way of doing this in a more limited way, so as to protect that nature that's there, but still provide some of those burial sites, if you can think of no more sites in the city where we could do this, then by all means, make that choice. But I don't think that argument holds weight. Not for a second do I think this is the only option. I'll throw that out there in the hope that it might sway someone.
I'd also note as well, as was noted and raised in the public forum, is that actually our strategy on this has not come to Cabinet yet. It has not come to community scrutiny, which is the portfolio that it comes under, the directorate. And a lot of this is hinging on this is our only option. But as has been stated, and we've questioned and talked about, it's not clear that this is our only option. There are potentially other options, we haven't explored them. And I would have liked for this very pressing, important issue and strategy that we need to have for our city to have come to Cabinet, to have come to community scrutiny before this application came before us today. Because yes, okay, so we are time pressed on it, but we're not so, a strategy hasn't been brought forward in the last 10 years when we've known that our population has been increasing. It's come about now. So there's no reason to my mind that we need to be pressed into making this irreversible decision with long-running, decades-long impact. We did talk about, when we were on the site visit today, about how beautiful some other cemeteries are in our city, like Arnos Vale, where my grandfather's buried, or like Greenbank Cemetery. They are beautiful, but they have not been used or minimally used for a very long time. It takes a long time for the natural world to regain its hold on our environment. And we don't have, can we afford to make this irreversible decision today when we could wait until the next committee in order to have more information, to answer some of the questions that the committee members have got, to have the strategy or the thoughts and to be able to consider what the other options are for our city that aren't on this site, because there are options. We're a massive landowner. We have other plots of land in this city that we could potentially use, but we haven't explored them. And that's a massive question to me, and one I would like answered before we make this particular we can't come back from this particular decision. And I'd like you to all have that particularly in mind. Lorraine had her hand, and then Katja.
Right, so I've sort of sat quietly throughout this because it's, I really struggled with this one. I usually sort of, when we've had difficult planning decisions, it's usually common sense prevails. There's lots of challenges with this issue, and I think there's something about, I've heard some comments about, the use of a cemetery. I actually have a belief that the cemetery is vital, and it's not. Let's not misrepresent what's being said here. It's not about certain cultural groups. It's a human right to have a right. Yeah. So let's not get blindsided by focusing down a road that people may misunderstand what that's meant by. The issue is about people choosing to have a burial or to be cremated or other. So it's nothing to do necessarily with culture. So please, I just wanted to say that. The dilemma I have, so I am right slap bang in the middle of abstaining, which is a coward's way out. So I'm being honest about that. I'm not a coward, but it's a coward's way out in this decision, in this situation where we find ourselves, because as it's been said, council land, it belongs to the council. No one can dispute that. and then we have a long-standing farm that's had access to that land, and it's serving the community, it's well established, it's well loved, it's the only farm left, isn't it? All those things. I mean, crikey, you know, how much more emotive can that be versus the right for the council? So I'm trying to separate something that's really hard to separate versus the council having the right to use their land. That is why this is so, it's making me quite tearful. Emotive. Yeah. So I'm going down the road of abstaining, I think.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Lorraine. Kasia?
When I said it, I didn't mean a specific culture, honestly. I know how emotive burials are and how important they are to people. I was going to actually ask a question about whether we can have just a very brief mitigation from 1 month to another to find out whether we could either add something for consideration in the application for Yew Tree Farm to be involved further in developing the specifically the lower site, the which is the one, area 2. Was it? No, not area 1. Area 1 is the triangle. Area 3, sorry. The second site, area 3. Whether the Yew Tree Farm can have more say in how they can work with the council in doing this. I'm not entirely convinced. We've got Bristol City Council is hemmed in by other councils, and it doesn't have much land even for building housing, which we have such a drastic shortage of. So I'm not entirely convinced. It's possible there is land, but I'm not entirely convinced by that one either. The tree chopping down, I have not heard anything about a big tree being chopped down right next to a heritage site. That's something there was nothing said about that. In fact, they said they were going to keep most of the trees. There was only a small, as far as I understood, there was only a small bit that you're going to go, where the road goes through into which is not one of the big ancient trees next to a heritage site. But I am very worried about Yew Tree Farm. I do want to keep it going. We have to balance everybody's needs in this one, on that one. That's the only one I wanted to see if there was some sort of consideration we could put into the application to make sure that there was some consultation with Yew Tree Farm, and that we make sure that the development is done incredibly sensitively. Yes, it did take 100 years for Annos Vale to get to where it is, because it was neglected for 100 years. It was literally forgotten about. If we're helping it along, which is what we do nowadays, then I don't think it'll take 100 years. I think it will be, and we leave the big trees, I think it will be better. It will go faster. It won't be that much damage. And the damage to telling someone, I'm sorry, you can't bury your grandfather here, you have to go all the way to the other side of Somerset. I don't want to be the councillor that has to try and work that one out.
So in terms of how the committee works and our decision making itself, it's when we take a vote, and if the committee is minded to vote for the application, then the application is then granted. That's it. That's done. Now, we used to defer things pending other considerations. What we now do, if you remember from previous applications that have come back, if we voted to reject the officer recommendation today, it would automatically come back at the next committee for reconsidering. It's like a cooling off period. Now, what we could do, seeing as there's a lot of squinty eyes happening amongst the committee, is if you're not entirely satisfied that this is the right application and that you can happily vote for this application, which is irreversible if it gets passed, we can vote to refuse it today, and it will come back at the next committee in 6 weeks' time with potentially more information. At that point, there will have been an item at the Community Scrutiny Committee next week where the strategy for this area, for burials, will be presented, and we will have more information. And then if you still decide that you do want to vote for it, it can be with less squinty eyes, or maybe you might decide otherwise. But it feels like a lot of the committee are saying that they don't have the information, and I think this would be a way forward.
Hi, I simply, I feel sorry for the farmhouse. Basically, I agree with you. We should come back another time and have more information, and then we could decide what to do. Yeah. Because we don't have any information at the moment, and they were not consulted, and they were not part of the plan. So it would be good for both of you to work together.
Okay, thank you. So in which case, if I can have a seconder to vote for the officer approval to see whether or not we have to test that, or a seconder to reject it, pending it coming back with more information.
Chair, I'd like to test the will of the committee and propose that we accept the officer recommendation.
Okay, would anybody like to second? Okay, Leslie would like to second that. Okay, so this is for the officer recommendation. So if you vote for this, then it passes and this application gets approval. So therefore, I'll go round. Chris, would you like to vote for the officer recommendation, which is to approve this application?
I'm afraid.
No, okay. Leslie?
Yes, I would.
Guy?
Against.
Lorraine? Against. Sarah?
In light of what's been said, I think I'm going to go against.
Thank you. Amal?
Against.
Katya?
Against.
Steve? You're for into the mic, just for clarity.
4.
4, and it's against from me. So the officer recommendation fails and falls. So therefore, can I have another motion to refuse? Okay, so Guy, and then seconded by Chris. So this is to refuse the refuse this application. So
to defer pending a
Yeah.
report back.
exactly. So it will come back probably. Exactly, it will probably come back at the next DCB. So Chris.
Sorry, just to clarify who was moving and seconding.
So Guy was moving it, Chris was seconding it.
Great.
Okay, great. So then, so you want to vote for the motion that you've just to sort of defer it? Yes. Four. Leslie?
Don't confuse me more.
Against.
Okay. Guy?
4.
4. Lorraine?
4.
4. Okay.
4. Sorry, 4.
Claire? Claire? Sarah?
4.
Amal? 4. Katya?
4.
Steve?
I have to come out against, don't I?
You don't have to.
Well, I could abstain, but
Right.
but no, I'll vote against it. I will be consistent.
Okay, thank you. And it's a 4 for me. So for now, it's deferred to the next committee. It will return, presumably, at the next DCB, which is in 6 weeks' time. So be aware of that, please. Thank you very much. Okay, and with hopefully more information. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you next time.